Good evening, my friends, and greetings in the spirit. This is how Joel S. Goldsmith often opened, softly, reverently, inviting you not merely to listen, but to enter a sacred atmosphere. Tonight, I invite you to set aside the noise of the world, just as he would encourage, and allow your inner ear to open, for we are about to step into something far deeper than belief, far greater than doctrine, a living experience. My friends, have you ever wondered what truly happens, not theologically, not intellectually, but spiritually, experientially, when you finally understand what the kingdom of God really is? Not in theory, not in hope, but in realization. For when this understanding dawns, something remarkable begins to unfold. The old fears loosen their grip, the tight places of life begin to dissolve, and an inner presence starts to take over, directing, supplying, and revealing itself as the true life within you. But here is the great mystery. Most seekers spend their lives searching for the kingdom, never realizing where it actually is and what happens the moment they recognize it. And what does happen? Well, that is exactly where our journey begins. Before we dive deeper into this sacred unfolding, I want you to pause, breathe, and prepare your consciousness for what you are about to hear. And if this message already stirs something in you, some quiet recognition, some spiritual memory, like this video, comment the symbolic number 111 and subscribe so you can walk with us on this path of illumination. Now let us enter the kingdom together. The kingdom of God is a living consciousness, not a location, and so, as we continue, let us gently lift our thought from the centuries-old idea that the kingdom is somewhere out there, a distant realm, a future reward, or a mystical place reserved for the worthy. Joel would remind us that such beliefs belong to the human mind, not to spiritual awareness. The kingdom of God is not a destination to travel toward, it is a state of consciousness that is already present, already complete, already here. To truly understand this is to step into an entirely different dimension of living. You begin to see that the kingdom is not reached by movement, but by recognition. It is not built by human effort, but revealed by spiritual awareness. And it does not depend on conditions, circumstances, or the world's approval. It exists before those things, beneath those things, and untouched by those things. When Joel spoke of the infinite invisible, he was pointing directly to this truth. The kingdom is an ever-present spiritual reality that surrounds you, flows through you, and is you, but it remains unseen by the human senses. As long as we look for it with the eyes of flesh, we miss it. But the moment we turn inward, even for a breath, we begin to feel something subtle, a presence, a quietness, a sense of being held. That is the beginning of entering the kingdom. For some, it comes as peace so profound it cannot be explained. For others, as a sudden loosening of fear, or a warmth that rises gently from within. For others still, it's simply an awareness that something real is here, not a theory, not a belief, a presence. Once you sense that presence, even in the faintest degree, you understand why the kingdom cannot be found by traveling to sacred places or performing sacred rituals. The kingdom is never as absent, it is only as unrecognized. It is not waiting for you to perfect yourself or earn your way into spiritual awareness. It is the truth of your being, already established, already functioning, already whispering beneath every moment of your life. And this changes everything. It means that the peace you seek has been with you all along. It means that the guidance you pray for is not withheld. It is simply unheard until the mind grows still. It means that the love you desire is not missing. It is the very essence of the kingdom itself, yearning to be realized as your own true nature. To grasp this is to shift from seeking outwardly to allowing inwardly. You begin to understand why Joel spoke so often of inner communion, of quiet contemplation, of surrendering human thought so that spiritual awareness can rise. The kingdom is experienced when the personal self grows silent enough for the divine self to make itself known. And when it does, you discover that this kingdom is not a place you visit temporarily, but a living consciousness that accompanies you into every activity, every decision, every relationship. It becomes the atmosphere of your life, the invisible environment in which your true identity lives, moves, and has its being. This realization is the first step in understanding what truly happens when you awaken to the kingdom of God. Awakening to the kingdom begins with inner silence. And this is where the real journey turns inward, for no one enters the deeper awareness of spirit through noise, struggle, or mental force. Joel often reminded us that the human mind, restless, analytical, filled with effort, is the very veil that keeps us from perceiving what is already present. The kingdom is not hidden, it is simply drowned out by the constant vibration of thought. To awaken, then, is not to think more spiritually, nor to accumulate spiritual ideas, nor to repeat sacred phrases with intensity. Awakening comes when the mind becomes still enough for the spiritual faculties to open. It is the silence, not the words, that reveals God. When you allow yourself to sink into that quiet, something remarkable happens. You begin to feel that the silence itself is not empty, it is alive. It is aware. It seems to listen to you, to surround you, and in a strange and subtle way, to know you. That is the first touch of the infinite invisible. It does not speak in sentences, it speaks in presence. Most seekers overlook this because they expect some dramatic revelation or a sudden burst of light. But Joel taught that the kingdom rarely arrives with noise. It arrives more like dawn than lightning, gently, steadily, quietly illuminating everything it touches. In the beginning, inner silence may feel unfamiliar. You may notice the mind resisting, wandering, or trying to fill the space with ideas. That is natural. The human mind was trained to chase, to grasp, to interpret. But the kingdom reveals itself only when that chasing stops. Even a few seconds of true inward stillness can open a doorway that the mind has never entered before. The silence is not a pause between thoughts. It is the realm in which truth lives. As you relax into it, something within you becomes attentive in a new way. You're not waiting for a message, you're not demanding guidance, you're not trying to create an experience. You are simply present. And in that presence, you begin to realize that you're not alone. There is a deeper self within you, a consciousness that is calm, unhurried, and untouched by the world's turbulence. That self is the gateway to the kingdom. The more you rest in this inner stillness, the more you begin to sense that it is not your silence at all. It is God's silence operating in you. It is the peace that passes understanding, not because it is mysterious, but because the human mind cannot produce it or explain it. Gradually, you start to trust this silence. You find that answers arise from it, not as thoughts you manufacture, but as revelations that appear gently, spontaneously, and with a certainty that feels unmistakably divine. You begin to understand why Joel called silence the highest form of prayer. In silence, you are no longer reaching outward, you are receiving inwardly. And in that receiving, the kingdom begins to unfold itself in ways the mind could never orchestrate. The more deeply you enter the stillness, the more clearly you feel the presence that lives behind it, guiding you, supporting you, and inviting you to step further into the reality of spirit that has been waiting within you all along, for the kingdom is realized, not attained. And this is where the seeker's path often turns from striving to surrender, because the human mind has been conditioned to believe that spiritual growth is a ladder, something to climb, something to earn, something to reach only after great discipline or sacrifice. But the kingdom of God cannot be gained by effort, for effort is born of the belief that you are separate from what you seek. Realization begins when that belief dissolves. Joel often clarified that we do not attain God, because God is not absent from us. We do not achieve the kingdom, because the kingdom is not withheld. What we discover is that the kingdom has been fully present from the beginning, woven into the fabric of our being, waiting not for achievement, but for awareness. The shift is not upward or outward, it is inward. It is a dawning, a recognition, a seeing through the illusion of separation. Realization is like waking from a dream. Nothing new is created, nothing new appears. You simply open your eyes to what has always been true. The difference is not in the kingdom, it is in your consciousness. This is why spiritual effort, in the sense of struggling to be spiritual, often leads to frustration or exhaustion. You cannot work your way into something that is already yours. You can only awaken to it. And awakening is not a labor, it is a revelation. It is the moment when you stop running toward God and discover that God has been within you the entire time. When this begins to dawn, your seeking starts to soften. You no longer chase spiritual experiences as proof of progress. You no longer measure yourself by feelings, visions, or emotional highs. Instead, you start to notice a quiet knowing, a subtle inner clarity that has nothing to do with sensations and everything to do with identity. You begin to sense that the kingdom is not a far-off spiritual realm, but the very field of consciousness in which your true self exists. You realize that every breath you take is breathed within the kingdom, every intuition arises from it, every moment of peace is an opening through which it reveals itself. This realization does not shout. It does not announce itself. It comes almost imperceptibly, like the way a room brightens before sunrise. You might not even notice the exact moment it arrives. But suddenly, you recognize that something within you has shifted. You are no longer trying to become spiritual. You are beginning to see that you already are spiritual because you were created out of spirit itself. And as this awareness settles into you, your relationship with life begins to change. You respond to challenges differently. You find that you are less reactive, less fearful, less dependent on outer circumstances. You begin to feel a presence walking with you, guiding you, sustaining you, not because you reached a high spiritual plateau, but because you finally realized what was always true. This is the essence of realization, the unveiling of what never needed to be attained. It is the moment you stop searching outward and start perceiving inward, discovering that the kingdom is not a distant promise, but the silent, luminous reality in which your life has always been unfolding. Separation ends the moment the kingdom is recognized within. And this is where the greatest shift in consciousness takes place, because up until this point, most of us have lived under the deep-rooted illusion that we are isolated beings, separate from God, separate from others, even separate from our own true nature. This sense of separation is the source of fear, conflict, loneliness, and the endless search for security. But the instant the kingdom is recognized as an inner reality, the illusion begins to crumble. Joel often reminded us that separation is not a spiritual fact, it is a mental concept. It exists only in the human mind, not in the consciousness of God. The kingdom of God, being the presence and activity of the divine within, dissolves the belief that we are apart from the very source that sustains our life. And once this inner recognition takes place, the world around you appears entirely different. It is not that outer conditions change first. Rather, your perception is transformed. You begin to see through the lens of unity, where God is not a distant power watching from above, but the very life that animates you from within. The more deeply you acknowledge this unity, the more clearly you feel a quiet companionship, a presence that walks with you, speaks to you in the silence, and guides you even in the smallest details of your day. In this awareness, fear begins to dissolve, because fear is always rooted in separation. When you believe you are on your own, you worry. When you believe you must protect yourself, you tense. When you believe you must generate all your supply, all your wisdom, all your strength, you exhaust yourself. But the moment you recognize the kingdom within, you begin to feel supported by something greater, something steady, something unfailing. This recognition is not merely an idea, it becomes a lived experience. Suddenly you realize that you are never alone, not in quiet moments, not in challenges, not even in times of uncertainty. You sense a presence that is closer than your breath, nearer than your heartbeat, a presence that is not beside you, but within you as you. And this realization has a profound effect on your relationships. When you no longer see yourself as separate, you no longer see others as separate either. Judgments soften, grievances lose their hold, compassion rises naturally, not because you force yourself to be kind, but because you begin to sense the same divine presence in others that you feel within yourself. You recognize the kingdom in them as well, whether they see it or not. This is where spiritual harmony begins to unfold, not as a result of trying to love more or forgive more, but because the illusion of separation fades. When the veil drops, you see only one life expressing through many forms. You feel connected in a way that needs no explanation. Your heart opens without effort. Even the challenges that arise in life begin to appear differently. Instead of responding from fear or resistance, you respond from the awareness that there is an inner spiritual presence guiding every step. You begin to trust that whatever appears in your experience is not happening to a separate, vulnerable self, but within the larger context of an unbroken union with the divine. And in that trust, you discover a freedom you never knew was possible, freedom from the belief that you must navigate life alone, freedom from the burden of self-protection, freedom from the idea that God is distant or external. The kingdom recognized within becomes the doorway through which separateness dissolves, revealing a unity that has been present all along. So for the kingdom reveals itself through grace, not effort. And this truth gently shifts the entire posture of the seeker. Up to this point, so much of the spiritual search has been shaped by striving to be good enough, striving to be holy enough, striving to meditate correctly, pray correctly, or think correctly. But when you begin to sense the kingdom within, you realize that nothing in spirit unfolds because of personal effort. It unfolds through grace, the natural activity of the divine presence expressing itself. Joel often described grace as an effortless flow, like the way sunlight pours through a window without being invited, or the way a flower blooms without instruction. Grace is the nature of God in action. It requires no push, no strain, no manipulation. The moment you stop trying to make something happen, grace begins to reveal what has been happening all along. This is why deepening spiritual awareness often begins not in doing more, but in doing less. Less forcing, less controlling, less trying to manufacture spiritual experiences. Instead, you learn to rest inwardly, to become receptive, to allow the divine presence to reveal itself in its own way and its own timing. Grace never arrives under pressure. It appears when the mind becomes gentle enough to receive it. As this understanding grows, you start to trust the invisible more than the visible. You begin to lean inward, not as a retreat from the world, but as a recognition that the source of everything real and good does not originate from human effort. You discover that inspiration comes effortlessly, guidance appears spontaneously, and peace rises unforced. Often in the moments when you have stopped reaching for them, grace works in silence, behind the scenes of your thoughts, beneath the surface of your emotions. It does not shout or demand attention. Instead, it softens the heart, clarifies the mind, and gently redirects your path without the need for struggle. You may not even notice it at first, but you begin to feel supported in ways you cannot explain. You begin to sense harmony forming where there was once resistance. This is the rhythm of grace, subtle, natural, unearned. And as grace becomes more familiar to you, you start to realize that the blessings you once tried to force into existence were never meant to be achieved through willpower. They were meant to unfold through alignment. The moment your consciousness aligns with the kingdom within, grace begins to operate without obstruction. It enters your relationships, bringing healing where conversation failed. It enters your work, revealing solutions that effort never produced. It enters your inner life, dissolving fears that discipline could not overcome. You begin to trust this invisible operation. You begin to rely on it. You discover that grace is not occasional, it is constant. The only thing that fluctuates is your awareness of it. And this awareness grows each time you surrender the belief that you must control your life. When you give up the struggle to make outcomes bend to your will, space opens for grace to act. It begins to move ahead of you, preparing the way, arranging circumstances, and drawing into your experience everything that is aligned with your highest spiritual good. Grace does not add to your life. It reveals what was already established in spirit. It brings forward what was hidden by fear, effort, and mental resistance. And as you become more attuned to this quiet divine activity, you realize that grace is not something you receive. It is something you live in. It is the atmosphere of the kingdom, the natural flow of a life rooted in spiritual consciousness, continually unfolding without strain, without pressure, and without the need to force anything into being, for understanding the kingdom transforms fear into spiritual freedom. And this is the moment when the entire inner landscape of your life begins to shift, for fear is always born of the belief that you are separate, unsupported, or vulnerable. Fear arises when you feel you must rely on your own limited strength, your own imperfect understanding, or your own uncertain future. But when the kingdom becomes a living awareness within you, fear loses its foundation, because its foundation was the illusion of separation. Joel often taught that fear is not something to fight, it is something to outgrow through realization. You do not conquer fear by wrestling with it, you transcend it by awakening to the presence that renders fear powerless. The kingdom, once realized, reveals that there is a spiritual order already operating in your life, guiding, protecting, sustaining, and unfolding everything according to a wisdom far greater than the human mind. When you feel this inner presence, even in the faintest degree, fear begins to loosen. It does not disappear all at once, but it starts to lose its authority. You sense that you are no longer navigating life as an isolated self, but as part of a divine harmony. You begin to realize that there is an intelligence within you that knows what to do, a peace that knows how to sustain you, a love that knows how to guide you through each moment. This realization changes how you meet challenges. Instead of panicking or reacting, you find yourself pausing, waiting inwardly, listening for the quiet assurance that rises from the kingdom within. And it does rise. It rises not as loud answers, but as certainty. Not as emotions, but as clarity. Not as force, but as peace. Spiritual freedom begins in these moments of quiet certainty. You discover that you can trust the invisible more than the visible. You can rely on the presence that walks with you, even when you cannot see how things will unfold. This trust is not a mental exercise, it's an inner knowing that emerges from your contact with the kingdom. As this awareness deepens, fear begins to appear almost foreign to you, something that no longer fits your sense of identity. You begin to see that fear was never a spiritual reality. It was only a belief held by the human mind, and beliefs dissolve in the light of realization. You also begin to experience freedom in your relationships. When the kingdom becomes your foundation, you are no longer controlled by the fear of rejection, loss, or misunderstanding. You are able to love without grasping, to give without worrying, to speak without defensiveness. The presence within becomes your security, allowing you to interact with others from a place of spiritual strength rather than emotional need. This freedom extends into your decisions as well. You stop making choices rooted in fear of what might happen and begin making choices guided by what feels aligned with the kingdom within. You are no longer driven by anxiety, pressure, or the compulsion to control outcomes. Instead, you become receptive to the intuitive flow of grace that reveals what is right for you. And then something even deeper occurs. You begin to sense that life is not happening against you, but through you. You recognize that divine order is not a distant concept. It is the very structure of your existence. You begin to feel safe, not because conditions are perfect, but because you are resting in a presence that is perfect. Fear loses its authority because you no longer take your cues from appearances, you take them from the kingdom unfolding within your consciousness. This is the essence of spiritual freedom. Not the absence of challenges, but the absence of fear in the midst of them. It is the quiet confidence that rises when you know, without doubt, that you are living in a universe held together by divine harmony, and that this harmony is the very foundation of your being.